Murderous machines rule the earth, killing everyone in sight. A communist dame tries to find a savior in alternate realities. And voodoo worshippers are in a crash course with space aliens trying to find a robot with a soul. You would think this is either the greatest movie never made or a Hideo Kojima game, but you'd be wrong. This is a comic book released by a publisher focused on handgun magazines following Japanese aesthetics, done by Brazilians. Of course we're talking about Novas Aventuras de Mega Man, or NAM for short. Ever since the series became available online, the Brazilian-made comic has enjoyed a spotlight of sorts, regardless of the fact it's the red-headed stepchild of the franchise or Mega Man's Brazilian secret kind of fame. If that's how seasoned veterans of the franchise react to the contents of the comic, then imagine the people caught in the thick of it when it began to hit shelves in 1997. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. I am a NAN veteran. The newsstands were our trenches, and the cashiers are only allies in the 16-issue long ride. From the drastic shift in tone of the all-ages colorful franchise it was known to be at the time, to what saw print in this series, there is really no shortage of bewilderment found in a plot that is barely existent and yet all over the place. That, however, is not what we're here to talk about. Many places have told you the story of NAN. This time, we're going to tell you the history of Novas Aventuras de Mega Man. How it happened, and why it happened. In 1994, Saint Seiya premiered on Brazilian television, and although Brazil had seen its share of anime before, Saint Seiya became a countrywide sensation, causing a bona fide anime invasion to hit Brazil in the following years. In no time at all, newsstands were flooded with magazines talking about the series and assorted pop culture matters. Their success would allow for the creation of Animax Magazine, which, unlike most mags making the rounds, was focused firmly on Japanese pop culture and dealt with anime and manga exclusively. Helmed by Sérgio Peixoto Silva and José Roberto Pereira, two up-and-coming anime enthusiasts under the publisher Magnum Press, it would constantly urge readers to make their own manga. To that end, the magazine also included tutorials on anatomy, drawing materials, and writing tips. Roughly around September 1996, in the 6th issue of the magazine, Pereira broke out the news they had acquired the license for a Mega Man comic book to be published in Brazil, fully in manga style. This marked the beginning of the comics run. But how did it happen? Most people have the impression that the Mega Man comic existed in a vacuum, but Brazil had licensed comics for a number of gaming properties published. According to Peixoto himself, they were already in touch with Character Toy Trade, a company that licensed Capcom products to Brazil. When they heard about the upcoming release of the Ruby Spears Mega Man cartoon series, Peixoto and Pereira saw this as an opportunity and pitched the idea to Magnum Press. A caveat. To convince Magnum's executives to enter the publishing deal, the involved volunteered to work for free. Although Pereira's wife Marcia Harumi Saito was set to illustrate the first issue in the series, this meant they need to find volunteering artists to illustrate the book. This would result in Animax readers being prompted to submit their art tests to the publishers, and out of the myriad of results, going with the most professional out of the bunch. Contributing artists would be compensated with a copy of the published issue for use in their personal art portfolio. To cap things off, Magnum would then request a 4-issue evaluation period to move forward with the publication of the series. All things considered, it seemed production in the book was taking off, with one tiny exception. None of those spearheading the project had ever played a Mega Man game in their lives. Pereira asked an Animax reader what they knew of the series, and over that info, he developed his plot for the book. So for those wondering where slasher came from, there's your answer. Pereira didn't think much of the TV series or the games themselves for that matter, per written admission in the first issue's editorial. So, you have a writer who didn't care for either of the established plotlines, relying on second-hand knowledge to write an ongoing series about the franchise.
What could possibly go wrong?
Coupled with Pereira's disinterest in the source material, the pair decided to deliberately experiment with different styles for these tentative 4 issues, which saw pronounced whiplashes in tone issue to issue. In Pereira's own words, issue 4, a slow, bleak and contemplative piece focused on a homeless child who would become raw among some disturbing imagery, was the one issue he cherished the most in his entire run, since it dealt with the subject of child abuse. Once the 4 issues hit shelves, the evaluation period took place, and months later did Novas Aventuras de Mega Man number 5 appear. This marked Pereira's last issue on the book. In the most well-known bit of backstage dealings in the comic, Pereira wanted to have his own cast of characters completely unrelated to Mega Man take over the series, using the Mega Man name to draw readers' attentions to them in the first place. However, most people were under the impression this was a scheme Pereira kept to himself, as opposed to his stated goal, and that when he was found out, he was fired, despite the fact that's exactly what issue 2's end says word for word. On multiple accounts, Pereira left the book out of his own accord, citing both the fact he ultimately was not able to have his own story be published and lack of payment, which we now know for a fact was part of the deal, as Magnum wouldn't have published the book otherwise. Pereira also mentioned he wanted to have the demise of the established Capcom characters to be pretty graphic. Princess using Mega Man's eyes as earrings is one of the ideas he cited, and believed it would have been a great way to jumpstart their professional careers, that the first coup d'etat in a licensed comic would have granted them a lot of notoriety. Pereira and Peixoto ended up parting ways, though the split was not amicable. The book would then be written by Peixoto for its 6th issue. The publication found its final writer and caretaker in Orlando Tozetto Jr., who would write issue 7 to issue 16. Regardless, what would follow was the comic's most stable period. New artists would debut with each issue, as they stated was their goal for the comic, and the series hit shelves from issue 5 to issue 10. Issue 11 debuted after an announced hiatus lasting nearly 5 months, which was probably the first sign all was not well in the domain of Magnum Press. In editorials, the team said this hiatus was needed because end-of-the-year vacations resulted in diminished sales across the board for all magazines in Brazil, but taking month-long hiatuses was never common practice with most publishing houses. To make matters worse, as soon as issue 12 hit stands, the editorial announced a second hiatus, and that should sales prove satisfactory, the series would continue to be published for as long as they were able. After a couple more months down the road, Novas Aventuras de Mega Man 13 hit shelves. It was business as usual until the publication was cancelled with issue 16, ending the story on a cliffhanger. The reasons for the cancellation were never outright stated, but Animax itself would also cease publication sometime later. Peixoto and company would take business to a new publisher with a magazine called Anime EX. It's worth noting, however, that Novas Aventuras de Mega Man had been pitched to the higher-ups at Magnum, with the creative talent working for free, for about the first 10 or 12 issues. Now, whichever of these two did it happen to be, both in issue 10 and issue 12 the series vanished from shelves, and then 4 issues later it would be cancelled. Later still, Magnum released 4 trade paperbacks which spanned the 16 issues, and that was it for NAM. However, there were a few other projects in the pipeline that would still concern Brazilian-made Mega Man comics. In one Animax issue, a Mega Man X miniseries was teased with Peixoto as the writer and Rogério Hanata, who drew issues 11 and 13 of NAM as the artist. Other properties like Samurai Showdown and King of Fighters were teased as well. None of these would see publication, however, as Shalom Press, the publisher that would have handled them, folded before anything could materialize. According to himself, around 2005, Peixoto said the proposed series was to take place after Mega Man X4. It was intended to showcase Zero's reaction to the events of the game, as well as Repliforce survivors. Sigma would also be part of the plot. Nastenka, an original character featured in NAN, would have been featured in the story. Peixoto said he hoped he could publish a comic that was accurate to the game's plot. Peixoto would go on to be the editor for an official Mega Man anti-horror magazine that debuted in 2006, when the Battle Network anime was airing in Brazil. That magazine would see at least 4 issues published. So, not with a whimper, nor a bang, the world ended with a voodoo-garbed scientist heralding the end of everything. What are we left with? Novas Aventuras de Mega Man is an interesting piece of trivia in the franchise's history. People remarked how it seems to be straight out of an 80s OVA, and that is more on the nose than they would know. Audiences were still going through the backlog of the OVA boom from the 80s Japan saw, which were heavily comprised of hard sci-fi pieces trying to ape Hollywooden concept. Cyberpunk, dystopia, and violence were found in droves, and Brazil saw an enormous amount of the US manga catalog be broadcast in the years following Senseiya's hit-and-run success. Novas Aventuras de Mega Man was basically a book that featured Mega Man, but was not about Mega Man at all. It used characters from the franchise, sure, but it was only a vehicle to try to foster talents that followed the manga style, as well as distilling the anime influences of its writers throughout the artwork showcase. So, what do you guys think about NAM? Some people take it in stride, and are basically amused by how balls to the wall the whole thing is. Others seem to even resent the fact it was scanned and unleashed on the internet. Is it, dare I say, better than nothing? Should it have been left alone? Would you want to see it get a proper conclusion? You tell me in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like and share, as it always helps anyone making content these days. And thank you very much for watching.